Welcome back to the show. We are fueled by Hattie B's Hot Chicken. Hattie B's, Two Rivers Ford, Wholesale Supply Group. They're all a part of the Install Live with Greg Cosell of NFL Films. And Greg is here with us via Zoom today. We're going to do the podcast live for you because, we got a special announcement to make as to who is going to be this year's guest at the Install. And I know you're as excited. Well, you're probably more excited than I am because you have somebody who's actually football smart to talk to about these things as we get ready to break down the 2025 Titans free agents and draft acquisitions. How are you? Is he muted? Somebody's yelling at somebody else back there. I assume he's
like
muted.
There's 15 people in the control room.
This sounds about right.
There he is. Oh,
there he is. Hi, Greg.
Hey guys, what's happening?
just our normal level of production prowess around here. That's what's happening. How are you?
I could see your mouth moving. I couldn't hear a word, and my lip reading is not as good as it used to be.
Well, I mean, we may as well have just done it that way. But Greg, I was just saying how excited we are to have you on the show today, and to also announce our special guest because. The joke that I made was how much more fun you're going to have at the Install this year because you have somebody actually intelligent that you can talk football with, and we'll announce that guest here shortly.
Oh, you don't need to, be self-deprecating, Buck. Come on now, you're all right,
Just all right though. But we like to level things up though.
It's like in the Bruce Springsteen song Thunder Road, you're not a beauty, but hey, you're all right. You're all right.
Thanks, Greg. Greg Cosell here with us on 104.5 The Zone. And we're looking forward to having 250 Titans fans in the house again when we break down the upcoming draft class and the upcoming free agents. And in this particular edition of the show, Greg, we are going to be joined by Titans head coach Brian Callahan on the stage on that Friday night. And there are so many different ways that this is going to be interesting, the not least of which is the idea that they are probably going to draft a quarterback with the number 1 overall pick, even if Brian won't tell you and me that yet.
Well, that will make for a really fun conversation, and it'll make for a really good conversation because, I'm going to have all my notes, which you'll have on my breakdown of Cam Ward, who I've done in detail. I did him last summer from his last year at Washington State. I think I did 9 games this year from his 1 year at the U. So it should be a lot of fun because you know how I do this stuff. I do this without even thinking about who might draft a player. I just evaluate the player and think about how he could transition and project to the league. So, but I, without giving away specifics, I will say that I believed Ward was clearly worthy of a number 1 pick in the draft. He was, to me, the best quarterback prospect in this draft class.
Well, and that's the thing, Greg. You've been saying that since before the combine, and the rest of the NFL world felt like it just caught up to you here in the last, I'd say month and a half. It's always funny to see that dialogue play out on social media when we know that Greg in various platforms, not just the Install, but has been talking about Cam Ward as being worthy of the number 1 overall pick for quite some time now. And I know that we are looking forward to getting into the details, getting into the weeds, if you will, on the Cam Ward evaluation on that Friday night.
No, for sure. As we've been discussing the last 2 weeks, we don't want to leave our game in the locker room. We want to wait for May 2nd and really have a great discussion with the fans. We've done it. This will be our 3rd year. And for the last 2 years, the questions have been phenomenal. Fans are totally into it. They think about great things. They ask great questions, and the discussions are awesome. So, and obviously when you do draft a quarterback, that makes it, even more exciting because clearly that's the most important position on the field and the one that fans get most excited about.
Well, and in this year, Greg, we have so many different ways that this draft process can play out. We know that Cam Ward we think we know that Cam Ward is likely to be the number 1 overall draft pick. It's, I'd say 99.99%. And it sounds like Travis Hunter is going to go second to the Cleveland Browns. Now, of course, that's hypothetical right now, and they view him, it seems, as a wide receiver in Cleveland, which is something that we have talked about in a couple of our different previews. We've done positional previews, and we'll do a bit of one today here for the audience. But the idea of Travis Hunter in Cleveland, I would assume he's immediately wide receiver 2 in that offense behind Jerry Jeudy, wouldn't you?
Yes. And if that's the way they see it, I mean, don't forget they still have Denzel Ward, they have Martin Emerson. I mean, they have two quality outside corners. I don't know if they would plan on playing him, at corner in certain packages. I mean, I think you can be a nickel corner or a third corner and play wide receiver. I just don't think you can be a spot corner, play on the outside on every snap. To me, you can't be a part-time corner, uh, unless you're just playing in packages like nickel or dime. But you can't be a part-time corner if you're going to play every snap. So, look, he's a really good wide receiver prospect as well. I've felt that corner would be maybe his best position just because you can always find receivers. I'm not saying you can always find receivers who are like Travis Hunter, but I think that there's always more quality receivers than there are quality corners. I guess that's the best way to say it.
Greg Cosell of NFL Films is here with us on 104.5 The Zone. Greg's here because we are announcing that Titans head coach Brian Callahan is going to be our special guest at the Install Live. You can get your tickets at 1045thezone.com now to join us on Friday, May the 2nd, in the Analog Room at the Hutton Hotel. Lucas even has a question for you, Greg.
And Callahan needs help, Greg, in the wide receiver room in 2025. As we've gotten more and more solidified in the Cam Ward to the Titans pick, feeling pretty secure that that's what they're going to do. We've talked more and more about the 35th overall pick and the idea of adding either an edge rusher or a receiver there. It's been interesting, Greg, and I know you're not keeping up a ton with mock drafts and what happens off the field with these guys. It's strictly about tape. But it's been interesting because Luther Burden, it feels like, is slipping in that wide receiver 2-ish conversation at the moment, and that he could potentially be available at the top of the second round. To you, what was your initial assessment of Luther Burden at the beginning of this process, and what have you kind of learned about him over the course of the last few months?
Well, as you know, Lucas, all I do is watch the tape, so I don't know anything about Luther Burden, the person. So I don't know if there's any red flags that have cropped up. But if you're just looking at tape, I personally do not understand why he would be dropping. I did him last summer when he had the big numbers. I did him this year. Obviously, the numbers were not the same, but their offense and their quarterback situation was not as good as it was in 2023. But I think Luther Burden is a really good prospect. I think he's a 3-level dimension. He's got enough speed to get on top of corners. He's not terrifying speed like a Jamison Williams, but he certainly can run. He's really good run after catch. I think you can do a lot of things with Luther Burden in your offense. So to me, I mean, if you would, again, I don't know what the Titans draft board looks like. All I can say is I think he's better in this draft than the 35th pick. So if he would be sitting there at 35 and you really feel that wide receiver is what you want to draft at that moment, then I think he's a really good choice. Because we don't know their draft board and we don't know what plays out, obviously, before we get to 35. These questions are always hard to answer. But I don't in response to your basic question, I don't really understand why he's dropped. I think his tape is really good. I think his traits are really good. And you're always looking for that 3-level dimension for that receiver that can win over the top because he changes the way defenses play.
And here, in regards to that 35th pick, it's largely boiled down to edge or wide receiver. Which of those two positions, Greg, do you feel better about landing a high-impact player maybe a little bit later than the 35th pick, understanding that the Titans don't have a third-round pick at the moment?
Yeah, and that's a bit of an issue, Lucas, that not having a third-round pick, because normally in a draft you can always find wide receivers. Now, obviously, the goal is to find the right one, but normally in a draft you can always find wide receivers. Now, I would say edge rushers, it's a little different animal. Edge rushers, you can't just pick an edge rusher in the 5th round and feel like you've got your guy. So now it depends on how they see the rest of the draft and how they have edge rushers and receivers rated on their board. Do they feel that, hey, in the 4th round, we feel we can get a quality receiver who can step in and be a factor, maybe not necessarily a starting superstar, but a guy we can line up and play year one. If they feel that way, then you would want to go with an edge rusher because edge rushers will start to thin out. And while it's an interesting edge rusher class, Lucas, there's a lot of guys who I would say are potential players, guys that have really good athletic traits, but need a lot of work in terms of how to rush the quarterback.
Greg Cosell of NFL Films here with us on 104.5 The Zone. You know him because he's on with 3HL. He helps me host one. In fact, he carries me on the install with Greg Cosell that goes out once a week. And we're looking forward to Greg carrying me again for a night with you guys on May the 2nd, Friday, May the 2nd, less than 1 week after the draft, in which the Titans head coach Brian Callahan will be breaking down the tape of their new draft class and their free agent acquisitions with us live and in person. We're looking forward to it. Tickets available at 1045thezone.com. Greg, we haven't gotten to tight ends in our positional preview leading up to today.
Right.
And I would like to ask you about a couple of them. I wonder, and I know that, you don't do a big board or anything like that, quite or rankings necessarily, but when it comes to Colston Loveland versus Tyler Warren, how do you kind of view these two prospects, and who's the more well-rounded of the two based on your tape evaluation?
Yeah, and I think they're different players. That's the thing. I mean, Loveland probably fits into the Brock Bowers category. Not as good, but into that category of almost a big wide receiver who you can line up anywhere in your formation, and he can run any kind of route you want. He's a vertical dimension, and he's not a bad blocker. Don't forget, he comes from Michigan, and they're a run-first football team. So for 2 years, he was essentially, he was required to block and to make a wide variety of blocks, not just simple blocks. So he does have blocking ability, and he gave effort. But he's a guy that you can line up anywhere. You can split him outside. You can line him up at what we call boundary X, meaning the single receiver to the short side of the field. That really helps quarterbacks, by the way, in terms of researching the defenses pre-snap. And if you do have a rookie quarterback playing, you want to do that as much as possible. So Loveland is just a really fluid receiver. He's fun to watch, the way he moves. Warren is obviously a very good receiver, but he's different. He's bigger. He's girthier. As good as Warren is, I believe from watching his tape, there's still a ways to go. You didn't see him work very much against man coverage, so you didn't really get a great feel for how he separates versus man coverage. Now, he's really physical at the catch point. He can catch through contact. He's a very strong guy. He's a really good prospect as well. You can do a lot of things with Tyler Warren. But to me, they're somewhat different players in the way you would think about deploying them in the context of your offense.
Well, and that's the thing. And again, Greg, you know that I watch this from the uneducated eye or less than educated eye from my perspective. But even just watching Warren and Penn State's offense, Greg, and I wonder if you had a more informed observation to this effect, just the different ways that they were scheming him open within that offense to try and take advantage of the fact that he is a superior player in the college game, but there's not going to be an offense like that for him, at least initially in the NFL, right?
Yeah, I mean, he had 26 rushes. He played quarterback in high school, so, he's used to taking snaps. He had 26 rushes. He had some really good runs as a quote-unquote wildcat quarterback. He's probably an ascending player in the sense that as a pure tight end, he probably has a little bit of a ways to go. So I would say that, that I don't want to say it's going to take time. I think if you draft him, he's going to play right away, and he will be a factor. But I think that with Loveland, you probably have a really strong sense of what this kid is. And this kid is a matchup weapon right off the bat. And I'm not saying he's going to come in and catch, 115 balls or whatever like Brock Bowers did, but he falls more into that category of tight end.
Anytime you're in the business of drafting a quarterback, Greg, it seems that teams or front offices have at least explored various options, depending on who that quarterback is and what program they come from out of college, and reuniting them with the skill player that they have played with previously to kind of help just flatten that learning curve a little bit for them. And in the tight end category, there is Elijah Arroyo out of Miami, assuming that the Titans, and I think it's a safe assumption, end up with Cam Ward at the number 1 overall pick. Elijah Arroyo, what did you take away from his tape study?
Yeah, I think the Arroyo and Mason Taylor from LSU are probably the two tight ends that, could well be there at 35 if they're interested in taking a tight end, and depending on how they have them evaluated. Arroyo is a true vertical dimension. This kid can run. And he was used. Don't forget, Miami did have a run game because I watched a ton of Damian Martinez, their back, who I like a lot. So Arroyo was asked to make blocks. Is he the best blocking tight end? No, but he was asked to make blocks in base run game concepts like split flow zone. So he's done all this. But this kid can run. He may be the truest vertical dimension of these tight ends that we've mentioned. I mean, Loveland is as well, but Arroyo might be a little more just as a straight vertical dimension. So it depends what you're looking for. And then there's Mason Taylor from LSU, who's another pretty good athlete. My sense is he would start his career more as a tight end 2 than a tight end 1. But I think there's a lot there to be tapped. He wasn't really used as an intermediate and vertical dimension in the LSU offense. I certainly can't speak to why that's the case. He has those traits, but I think he could be an ascending player. I think, again, there's much in his body that I don't think's been cultivated yet in the way he was deployed at LSU.
Greg, you've obviously had conversations with coaches across your career at Films and throughout the course of your work with coaches and players who come through the Films building and things like that. But this Callahan show that we're getting ready to do, the live podcast, May the 2nd. Tickets available at 1045thezone.com. Brian Callahan going to be our special guest when Greg and I break down the tape of the 2025 Titans acquisitions, both in free agency and in the draft class. But in particular with Callahan, what direction are you looking to take that conversation, or what are you most interested in learning from him?
Well, I'm always interested in process. I mean, obviously, we're going to know who they draft, and fans are going to want to discuss those individual players, and I expect that. That's what we're there for. But I've always been a process guy, Buck. I'm always fascinated how they teach a young quarterback. Like, in other words, let's say it's Cam Ward. It seems, you're there, I'm not. So it seems as if, based on what you know, it's going to be Ward. So what would fascinate me is when the first day they get him in the building, okay, and obviously I don't know what the names of all these things now, where you start with OTAs and then it goes to minicamp, or it's minicamp and OTA. I don't know, but the point is, when they get him in the building and they start with him, what's the process? How do they go about teaching him? Because there's so much you have to learn. There's the fundamentals and techniques of the quarterback position, which are separate from whatever scheme you're going to run. Okay, then you work with that, but at the same time, you do have to work with him on the scheme, the offensive scheme. What are the concepts in the pass game you want to teach him? Okay, you have to do that. Then how do you teach him about the defenses that he's going to see in the NFL? So all this is a process, which is why, by the way, a lot of coaches believe it takes a good 3 years for quarterbacks to really understand, which doesn't mean they can't have success early, by the way. We've seen quarterbacks have success early, as you know, Buck. But in terms of truly understanding, you hear coaches tell me it takes 3 years. But that's what fascinates me, the process. Because I sit here and watch tape, and I always wish, and I've said this to you before, I wish I had the bat phone and could call a coach and say, okay, what was the concept here? What was the thought process? Why did you do this? What did you want your quarterback to do here? How did you design this read? Were there adjustments based on if he saw something with the defense? Those are the things that fascinate me. And obviously, we're not going to have enough time to get every answer to, because these things, I'm a little nuts, as you know, Buck. These things go through my head way too often. But, those are the things that truly interest me, the whole process of how you teach and coach the quarterback position.
I am so excited for the live show. I'm excited for the live show every year, Greg, but this is going to be a fun one. And even more so, Greg, because not just because Brian Callahan is going to be a part of the live show, and to have a coach breaking down the draft class that they've just assembled, there's not anything like this in 31 other NFL markets, and we're very appreciative to both the Titans and to Cumulus for making all of this happen. But also, we're going to have an extra carrot for people this year at the show. We're going to have your draft evaluations of these players at the tables for people to follow along with, because the process that Greg goes through in scouting these guys is like he says, insane. But to see it on the page and then have Greg and Callahan articulate it for you on the monitors as we break down tape on that Friday night, it's going to be as good a thing as I think we've done to date, buddy. And we put on some pretty good shows, not to brag
and
on
you know
us.
what? I'm believe it or not, I'm kind of hoping that Coach Callahan sees things differently because I like to learn. I'd love for him to say, "Hey, I didn't see it that way," and then have him tell me how he sees it. Because that's the way you learn. You know, I always believe that reasonable, smart people can disagree on stuff and you can talk about it. And, that's the way I've learned through the years is, talking to coaches, talking to a lot of people, is they say something that just resonates with me in a totally different way than I saw it. And that helps me then when I go back and watch the tape.
Tickets are available. They may still be available. You'll just have to go and find out. 1045thezone.com is how you get involved. Greg, I look forward to our conversations each and every week. I'll look forward to our conversation next week ahead of the draft. And then on May the 2nd, when we break it down for 250 Titans fans in the house at the Hutton Hotel that will host us for the third straight year. Good people over there. Many thanks to Wholesale Supply Group, Two Rivers Ford, Hattie B's, and Monkey Shoulder Whiskey, also going to be a part of the live show this year. Buddy, thanks for stopping by, and I'll see you on May the 2nd.
All right, Buck. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
That's the main man, Greg Cosell, and we are so excited to have Brian Callahan be a part of the show. That's going to be an incredibly informative and fun live show to be a part of, and we're looking forward to having you guys in the house as well. Last call for phone calls if you got them. I'm Buck Rising. It's 1045 The Zone.